The secret of Skinwalker Ranch has spent 7 seasons chasing a single, stubborn question. What actually lies beneath this stretch of Utah high desert? For years, the investigation team has pointed cameras, sensors, and instruments at the surface of the ranch, hoping the ground itself might finally offer an answer. This time, the answer didn't come from the surface at all. It came from directly beneath the mesa that has watched over this property since long before anyone thought to study it scientifically. The mesa has always been treated as a backdrop, a fixed landmark against which stranger events seem to unfold. Lights in the sky, unexplained readings, animals that refuse to cross certain patches of ground for reasons no rancher could ever fully explain. What the team hadn't seriously considered, at least not until recently, was that the mesa itself might be hollow in places no one expected. It started, as these things often do, with a discrepancy nobody could immediately explain. Ground-penetrating radar sweeps, conducted across several survey seasons, kept returning inconsistent results at the very same coordinates near the base of the mesa. One year, the data suggested solid rock. Another year, at nearly the same depth and location, it suggested open space. Geologists on the team initially chalked this up to equipment calibration or seasonal moisture affecting the readings. But when a third survey, using updated equipment, produced yet another conflicting result, that explanation stopped holding up. Older ranchers in the area had long spoken about livestock that avoided a specific strip of ground near the mesa's base, sometimes doubling back rather than crossing it. For decades, this had been treated as folklore, the kind of detail documentary crews mention and then quietly move past. But placed next to the radar inconsistencies, it took on a different weight. Was there something beneath that stretch of ground capable of producing an effect strong enough for animals to notice, even if instruments couldn't fully confirm it? One rancher, interviewed years earlier for an unrelated segment, had described the behavior in specific terms. Cattle wouldn't simply hesitate at the strip of ground, they would arc around it entirely, sometimes traveling a noticeably longer route to avoid crossing that particular stretch, even when the direct path was otherwise clear and familiar to them. At the time, it had been noted as an interesting anecdote and little else. Reviewed now, next to a confirmed geological anomaly sitting almost directly beneath that same stretch, it read less like a curiosity and more like a piece of evidence the investigation had simply not been ready to use. That question was enough to bring the team back to the mesa with a fresh set of eyes and better equipment than had been used in any previous survey. A geophysicist working through the archived scans noticed something the earlier interpretations had missed. The anomaly beneath the mesa wasn't shaped like a chamber or a simple pocket of air. It extended, it had a direction, a linear quality more consistent with a passage than an isolated void. That single observation reframed the entire investigation. A pocket of trapped air might be explained by any number of ordinary geological processes. A passage, however, suggested something with a beginning and an end, something that might connect to other spaces the team hadn't yet identified. Was this a natural lava tube, a remnant of the volcanic activity that shaped much of this region millions of years ago? Or could it be something more recent, an old mining shaft perhaps, dug and later abandoned before anyone thought to record it? Researchers pulled historical land and mining claim records for the area, searching for any indication that someone had once dug into this ground. The records were incomplete, as records from that era often are, but nothing definitively matched the location or shape of what the radar was now describing. Whatever this passage was, it didn't appear to correspond to any documented human activity. That left the geological explanation on the table, but only barely, because the shape of the anomaly still felt too deliberate for comfort. A secondary search widened the time frame, looking not just at mining claims, but at any recorded excavation, well drilling permit, or utility survey that might explain a long, narrow void beneath the mesa. Nothing in the modern record matched either. Whatever had created this passage, it predated the era of documented excavation in this part of the state, or it had been created by a process no one had thought to look for in the first place. Either possibility kept the mystery firmly open. At this point, the only way to move forward was to see the ground itself. The team returned to the base of the mesa, this time prepared to search for a physical entry point rather than rely solely on remote sensing. It didn't take long to find something worth investigating. A narrow fissure, barely wide enough to fit an arm through, sat almost exactly where the radar data placed the edge of the anomaly. What caught the team's attention wasn't the fissure's size, it was the air moving through it. A steady, consistent airflow drifted out of the opening, cool and faintly mineral in scent, the kind of airflow you'd expect from a much larger connected space rather than a small, isolated crack in the rock. Handheld thermal equipment confirmed what their skin had already told them. The air coming from the fissure sat several degrees below the surrounding rock temperature, a difference too consistent to attribute to simple shade or time of day. Two investigators debated the implications on camera, one leaning toward a natural explanation involving deep groundwater regulating the temperature, the other pointing out that the airflow's consistency didn't match what they'd typically expect from a purely natural formation. Neither could offer a confident answer. What they agreed on was that this fissure deserved far more attention than a quick reading and a photograph. There was also the matter of the fissure's placement. It didn't sit at some low, water-carved point in the terrain, the kind of spot where you'd expect natural drainage to have carved an opening over thousands of years. Instead, it sat roughly midway up a shallow slope, in a position that made a simple hydrological explanation harder to defend. A hydrologist consulted by the team noted that while unusual placements do occur in this type of terrain, they're uncommon enough to warrant a closer look rather than a quick dismissal. Environmental monitoring equipment was brought in to track the fissure over several days rather than a single visit. It was during this extended monitoring period that the investigation took an unexpected turn. A magnetometer placed near the opening began recording intermittent spikes, moments where the local magnetic field shifted noticeably before settling back to baseline. The spikes didn't correlate with time of day, with equipment recalibration, or with any known mineral deposit in the area's geological survey. This wasn't the first time equipment on the ranch had recorded unexplained magnetic activity. Other locations across the property had produced similar anomalies over the years, though rarely with this level of consistency. Was this fissure connected, in some physical or electromagnetic sense, to those other reported hotspots? Or was this something isolated to the mesa itself, a localized effect produced by whatever lay just beyond that narrow opening? The team cross-referenced the timing of each spike against the ranch's broader monitoring network, checking whether any other sensor on the property registered a corresponding fluctuation at the same moment. In most cases, nothing else stirred, but on two occasions, a separate sensor, stationed a considerable distance away, recorded a faint, nearly simultaneous disturbance of its own. The correlation wasn't strong enough to draw a firm conclusion, but it was too specific to dismiss outright, and it left the team wondering whether the fissure was an isolated feature or one small part of something spread more widely beneath the ranch than anyone had previously mapped. There was only one way to find out with any real confidence, and it meant going further than a magnetometer reading from the surface. The team made the decision to send a small camera-equipped probe into the fissure, widening the opening just enough to allow it through without disturbing the surrounding rock more than necessary. What the probe's camera revealed changed the tone of the entire investigation. Beyond the narrow entrance, the passage widened into something with smooth, almost worn walls, extending further into the mesa than any of the radar models had predicted. The smoothness itself raised a question. Natural cave systems in this type of rock typically show jagged, irregular surfaces shaped by fracture lines rather than gradual erosion. This passage looked different. In several places, faint linear markings ran along the walls, patterns that a geologist reviewing the footage described as inconsistent with typical water erosion. Were these markings the product of some unusual geological process specific to this rock formation? Or did they suggest something else entirely? Perhaps evidence that this passage had been used, shaped, or traveled through over a long period of time, whether by natural forces or otherwise. The team was careful not to jump to conclusions. Regional accounts from indigenous communities do describe underground passages and hollow ground in parts of this broader landscape, oral histories that predate any formal survey of the area by generations. Whether this particular passage connects to those accounts remains an open question, one the team treated with appropriate caution rather than certainty. That caution led researchers back to the archives, searching for anything that might corroborate what the probe's camera had found. Buried within a 19th-century land survey document, a brief handwritten note referenced what the surveyor called hollow ground somewhere in the vicinity of the mesa. The phrase was vague, easy to dismiss as an offhand remark or a surveying error, and for well over a century, that's exactly how it had been treated. Seen now, alongside a confirmed passage matching a similar location, the note read very differently. If a surveyor had noticed something unusual here more than 100 years ago, why was it never formally investigated? Land surveys from that period often noted oddities without following up on them, particularly in remote terrain, where thorough exploration simply wasn't practical. Still, the timing was hard to ignore. Modern instruments were now confirming, in far greater detail, something a surveyor had only been able to describe in a few passing words. A historian working with the team spent time tracing the surveyor's broader body of work, hoping to determine whether hollow ground was a phrase used elsewhere in the region or whether it appeared only in connection with this specific stretch of the mesa. The search turned up nothing comparable in any of the surveyor's other recorded notes from that period, which made its appearance here more notable rather than less. Whatever prompted that observation, it seemed tied specifically to this location and to whatever the surveyor briefly encountered before moving on without further comment. With historical and physical evidence now aligning, the team pushed the investigation further into the passage than they had gone before. The probe continued past the marked section of wall, following the passage as it gradually widened. Then, without warning, the readings coming back from the onboard sensors shifted dramatically. The passage opened into a wider chamber, and the moment it did, the ambient electromagnetic interference the team had been tracking for days dropped to nearly nothing. This was the opposite of what anyone expected. The fissure near the surface had produced spikes in magnetic activity. This chamber, deeper and further along the same passage, produced almost none. On camera, the reaction from the team was immediate and unmistakable. Equipment operators exchanging glances as they rechecked their instruments, assuming for a moment that something had failed. It hadn't. The readings were accurate. Something about this chamber's structure appeared to be dampening electromagnetic activity almost entirely, creating a kind of quiet zone within an otherwise active system. A geophysicist on the team offered one possible explanation, suggesting that certain rock compositions can act as a natural shield against electromagnetic interference under the right conditions. It's a documented phenomenon in some geological formations, though rarely to this degree. Others on the team weren't fully convinced that explanation accounted for everything they were seeing, particularly given how sharply the readings changed at the chamber's threshold rather than tapering off gradually, as a purely geological shielding effect might be expected to do. To test the shielding theory, the team ran a controlled comparison, placing identical sensors at several points along the passage and recording how the readings changed with each step deeper. If natural shielding were responsible, they expected a gradual decline as the sensors moved further from the surface. Instead, the data showed something closer to a boundary, a fairly narrow zone where the readings dropped sharply rather than tapering off. That kind of sudden transition is harder to explain through gradual rock density alone, and it left the geophysicists' working theory intact but unconfirmed. One plausible explanation among a few the team was still weighing. It was here, standing at the edge of this newly discovered chamber, that the investigation encountered its most significant development yet. A follow-up radar sweep, conducted from within the chamber itself using portable equipment, picked up something beyond the walls the team could see. Deeper still, running roughly perpendicular to the passage they had just traveled, was the outline of a second void system, distinct from the one they had been mapping for the past several days. This second system didn't share the same structural signature as the first. Where the original passage had presented smooth, worn walls consistent with long-term natural or semi-natural formation, this deeper structure showed a different geological profile entirely, one that left the team's geologists divided. Some argued the two systems likely formed through entirely separate processes at different points in the region's geological history, only later ending up in proximity to one another. Others weren't ready to rule out a shared origin, pointing to similar multi-layered cave systems documented elsewhere in the world, where distinct formation processes produced connected networks over enormous spans of time. Which explanation is correct remains unresolved. What the team can say with confidence is that this second system exists, that it sits at a depth beyond what any prior survey of the ranch had mapped, and that its presence raises questions about just how much of the ground beneath this property has gone unexamined. If one passage, hidden for over a century despite a documented historical reference, could go unexplored for this long, what else might still be waiting beneath the Mesa's surface? The portable radar unit could only offer a rough outline of the second system before its range was exhausted, enough to confirm its existence, but not nearly enough to map its full extent. Whether it runs a short distance before terminating, or continues on for a length comparable to the passage above it, is a question the current equipment simply couldn't answer. That limitation, more than anything else, shaped the team's next move, and underscored just how much of this discovery still sits beyond the reach of a single field visit. By the time the team concluded this stage of the investigation, they had confirmed far more than they set out to. The tunnel is real, instrumented, and documented on camera. The chamber's unusual electromagnetic behavior has been independently verified through repeated readings. The second, deeper system has been detected through radar, even if its full extent and origin remain unknown. What the team has not been able to do is offer a definitive explanation for why these features behave the way they do, or what, if anything, connects them to the decades of unexplained activity reported elsewhere on the ranch. That distinction matters. It would be easy to attach a dramatic explanation to what's been found here, but the investigation has been careful to separate confirmed observation from working theory, and working theory from speculation. What can be stated plainly is this: beneath a mesa that has stood as a quiet fixture on this property for generations, there is a passage that leads to a chamber, and that chamber appears to lead towards something deeper still, something the team has only begun to map. It's worth remembering that this entire chain of discovery began with a detail most investigations would have dismissed, a set of radar readings that simply didn't agree with each other from one year to the next. Had the team accepted the earlier, more convenient explanation of equipment error, the passage, the chamber, and the deeper system beneath it might still be sitting undocumented today. That's a pattern worth holding on to, not just for this mesa, but for how the rest of the ranch continues to be studied going forward. Future surveys are already being planned, this time targeting the second system directly, in hopes of determining whether it connects to the first passage or exists as something entirely separate. The team has discussed returning with deeper penetrating radar equipment, along with sensors capable of operating continuously over longer stretches of time, in the hope that sustained monitoring might reveal patterns a single visit simply cannot capture. Until then, the mesa keeps its deeper secret, and the investigation team is left with a discovery that answers one long-standing question about this property while opening several new ones in its place. What began as an inconsistency in old radar data has grown into a confirmed passage, a chamber with genuinely unusual behavior, and the outline of something deeper still, waiting to be understood. Sometimes, the most honest conclusion a documentary investigation can offer isn't a resolved mystery. It's a clearer picture of exactly how much remains unresolved, and a renewed sense of where to look next.